It's probably one of the number one questions I get being a mom of 8 kids. And that question is, what on earth are y'all doing about college? And I can tell you, with 8 different kids, 8 different learning styles, 8 different ideas about what the kids want when it comes to their careers and all of the rest, college has been a big topic of conversation around here. Well, there is a university that I want you to know about because it just hits so many of the things that are really important when it comes to considering your kid's college education. George Fox University, it's the number 1 private school in Oregon. It's a Christian university. It's located in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. And what's so great is in addition to a top-notch education, students have the opportunity to grow and deepen their faith, and they can learn in this really pivotal time in their lives who God made them to be. I mean, let's face it, we need more people coming out of our universities who know how to be leaders and how to be leaders with character. And George Fox University offers more than 60 academic majors. And that includes a nationally recognized engineering program, a nursing program. It allows your student to pursue their passions and prepare for the calling that God has for them. And let's not forget about fun when it comes to college. George Fox University students have a great student life. There are weekly campus events, there's chapel, there's service opportunities. There are 23 NCAA Division III athletic teams. Here's something that is important to me. There's a study abroad opportunity. So if your student wants to go and experience life somewhere else for a semester, they can do that. There's outdoor recreation because, of course, we're talking about Oregon, so gorgeous. George Fox University could be just the perfect fit for your student as you are looking into college, career, and all that goes beyond. George Fox University, where your student will learn and thrive in the center of it all.
Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Hey friend, I'm so glad you're here. This is the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Julie Lyles Carr. I wanted to give you a heads up that on today's episode, we talk pretty frankly about some things, so you might want to put on some headphones. So there is your headphone warning, and I'll see you over at the episode.
I don't think alcohol addiction, I don't think there's a formula or answer that it's necessarily genetic or because we were raised a certain way. I think there's so many things. And that's why I'm very adamant in the book that it's not why you drank. It's why do you not want to drink?
Hey friend, I'm Julie Lyles Carr. You're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. I am so glad you're here. Today we have a topic that, we've talked about a little bit on a couple of previous episodes, and it's such an important topic that I am really excited to talk about it again. And when you hear the resume of who I've got on today to talk to us about this topic, you're going to really perk your ears up too. I want you to welcome Chris Janssen to the podcast. Chris, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Julie. I'm excited.
Now, you've got a master's degree in counseling. You have worked with athletes and creatives and all kinds of people. You have done some amazing stuff as a coach, as a counselor. Give me a little snapshot of what you have done in your career, what you've done in your family, all the good stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start to answer that by saying I'm 55. So that's how I fit all of this in. So my husband and I just celebrated 29 years of marriage.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I grew up in California and we raised our kids there. They are now 22, 25, and 26. And the 22-year-old just married his high school sweetheart. So we've had our first wedding, which was so special. It was just last month. So I was a stay-home mom for 20 years, and that was after I got my master's in counseling. So I did some counseling. I worked in corporate. I worked in HR, recruiting, counseling, like a lot of career counseling, then had kids, stayed home, and did some counseling here and there through women's retreats, women's Bible study, church things. Then as the youngest was starting to get ready he was probably a junior in high school, I went back to school and got a coaching certificate. And because I wanted that to be my plan for empty nesting. And when I got a master's in counseling, no, I had never heard of a coach. A life coach was not a thing. And so there was a lot, I'll just say this, there was a lot about traditional therapy and counseling that didn't sit right with me. I felt like it was the more we talked about things, the more we analyzed the past, the more I personally felt stuck in it. So I kind of steered away from that. And then when I found out about coaching, I was so excited because really coaching is about what works, not what hasn't worked in the past. And traditional therapies also evolved since then. So it's not still like that. And a lot of people in my coaching program had PhDs and were therapists that wanted to add this forward-thinking coaching certificate into their therapy practice. So it's really exciting what's happening. So I got very excited to be a coach. I went to a Tony Robbins conference and I got really excited about the strategies, just the mindset, the again, like getting unstuck and moving forward. The techniques were exciting to me. So then I went and became a Tony Robbins coach for a short period of time. Had a great network of coaching friends. And then after that, went back to Chris Janssen coaching, which is what I do now. I work one-on-one with clients all over the world. And I wrote my first book in 2022 for my clients. I wanted all these coaching techniques, all my favorite exercises written down in a book. So that's what I did. And then I got the writing bug because I love writing and wrote a second book, which is what brought me to meet you and to be here talking about that because it's launching in February.
Right, right. So exciting. And, you know, I resonate so much with that, Chris, because one of my degrees is in psych and I got it a million years ago. I used to laugh and tell my husband, I think I could really be a good therapist, but I'd be a terrible business owner because I would be like, look, let's take this for 6 weeks. Let's figure out a solution to the issue and let's move on, which at the time, you're so right. It was much more of a focus on uncovering all kinds of things from the past and staying in that place. Now, you're right. It has all evolved over time. There are different techniques and tools and all kinds of things, whether you're going to therapy or you're getting coaching. There are great ways to get unstuck these days. But I had a similar internal conversation as I was looking and going into post-grad work, just thinking, man, I really think I could help people, but I don't think I could ever have a business. I think I would be churning it out too fast. I don't know if it would work. So I totally get that. Now, Chris, in the midst of all of this that you were doing, the mothering, the education, all kinds of things, you realized that you had an issue and it was something that you tried for a long time to kind of push down and squelch and, you know, kind of hide. What was it that you began to realize had taken hold in your life, had gotten a hook into you?
Yes, quite simply alcohol. Alcohol was not sitting well with me. I was not the elegant, dignified drinking woman that I imagined I could be. And it was a problem. I talk about this in my book. I say, people drink for all types of reasons. So I think for me, it's more important to know why I don't drink now than why I did drink. Because I could want to drink to be social. Then when things got tough with, babies at home, I could want to drink to numb. And then all the while, all these different reasons for picking up a drink, it wasn't just one thing. It's an addictive substance. So your body physically, you become addicted to it. And emotionally and mentally, you start attaching all these beliefs and limiting beliefs and all these things. For me, I attached a lot of shame and guilt to my self-worth because I did not understand, this was back in 2007, that how addictive it was and that there was a big part of this that wasn't my fault. Most of it wasn't my fault. It's not our fault if we take an addictive substance and become addicted to it, right? So when I didn't understand that, I attached a lot of negative self-worth to myself, making it my fault. And that's the work I get to do now. And that's why I wrote this second book, to really dive into what are the beliefs we are attaching, not just for addiction, but for everything in our life. What are the stories and the narratives we attach to the facts in our life? Because that will narrate our self-worth.
The book is called Grace Yourself, How to Show Up for the Sober Life You Want. I'm curious, for you, I've had experiences in my life, I've had people I've loved in my life where it got to a place where there needed to be an intervention. I've had people who've had an aha moment where they realized, oh, it's time for me to do something. I've had people who've gotten caught, people who have encountered issues with law enforcement. How did you come to the place where it was, wow, something's got to give, something's got to change?
Yes, it is different for everybody. And for me, it was not even as big of a deal as some other episodes I'd had. I was just doing, this is back before we had the internet. So I was doing back to school paperwork for the kids. And I had a glass of red wine, then another one, then another one. I was stressed. I felt stressed over all the paperwork. And then I heaped a bunch of shame on top of that. Like, you do all these things. This is my internal dialogue at the time, was you do all these things. How can you not be crushing this back to school paperwork? I thought there was a lot of negative self-talk. The more that escalated, the trying to numb that voice would escalate. And then that night, I fell asleep. I probably passed out, woke up about 3 a.m. and started to do, well, actually, I shouldn't say we didn't have the internet, because we did. We just didn't have it for the back to school paperwork, because that night I Googled, this is 2007. We were still like, they would send you the paper home from school and you fill it out and send it back with your kid back. So I did Google a support group. What do I do? Because I grew up, my parents and their parents were all teetotalers. Nobody drank. I grew up in a denomination of church. Well, they grew up in a denomination of church where no dancing, no drinking. So alcohol nobody had to deal with it. Then when I was little, like 8 years old, we moved to a non-denominational church. But my parents and everybody in my family still didn't drink. They didn't talk bad. It wasn't an anti-alcohol thing. It just wasn't in my home. So when I went to high school and there were people whose parents drank and it looked like they were pulling it off quite normally, they'd have wine with dinner and do dignified things, I thought, oh, I guess we can drink. I guess Christians can drink. And so I tried to partake in that, but from day one, it never went well for me. It never sat right with me. But I didn't understand that. I kept thinking, they're doing it, so I just need to try harder. I'm an achiever, right? I get what I go after. So I just kept trying harder and trying harder. And I did not understand. I'd never heard anyone that I knew personally or anyone in my family referred to as an alcoholic. I never heard of anyone I knew personally having a problem with alcohol. So that all fed into the fact I had this belief that I was a monster, that I was weird. Everybody could do this. They must be more disciplined and have more willpower than me. And nowadays, we're so fortunate now, we don't have those stories out in the world. But back then, we did. It was very shameful and stigmatic still. So I looked up an anonymous support group online, and I went the next day, then in the morning, scared to death, into this women's group. And that's when really my whole life changed, because a woman in the group said to me, I was like a deer in the headlights, right? And she knew it was my first time. And she said, it's not your fault. You have a condition. It's like an allergy. Just stay with us. There is a solution to this, and we're going to show you what it is. And you never have to have another drink again. And so in that moment, this doesn't happen this way for everybody, but in that moment for me, just shame and guilt just flew off my shoulders. I don't know why I didn't understand it wasn't my fault before, but I didn't. And the second my belief changed from I'm a monster because I can't quit drinking to
Yes, and I'm excited to unpack that with you because that is not something we often hear when we talk about the sobriety journey, is somebody being vulnerable about that. I likewise was raised in a denomination, also in California, in which we didn't drink, we didn't dance. And I saw the same thing when I would go to friends' homes, that was part of their family culture and seemed to be handled well. One of the things that I have often been curious about, and I don't have a real answer, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, Chris, is that because I was raised in a teetotaling home, I saw a lot of kids who were raised in the same denomination I was and in the same type environment kind of go wild when they actually had access to alcohol. And so in my mind, I often thought, well, see, this is why the teetotaling thing is a bad idea, because people don't know how to handle it. They haven't been raised in a way in which to know the tools and know the thresholds. And that's part of the problem. I've lived enough life now, and as I'm seeing the sober movement continue to grow and grow in a way that's really afresh, I look back now and I'm like, I don't know that the teetotaling was really the problem. Maybe, maybe not. What do you see in that? Because I do think there is something to the psychology of when something is forbidden or something is seeming to be done by the other people out there who are cooler or more sophisticated, and our little home of origin or our little cluster of people, well, we're the ones who are kind of behind the times. It can make some of these things seem really attractive. And if we don't have the tools for understanding how it's impacting us, can kind of double up on us. Maybe, but I want to hear your thoughts on it too, since you had a similar upbringing.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have thought that question to death, really, over the years. But over the last several years, I have come to firmly believe that there is not one answer. There is no formula. There is no formula that if you were raised by teetotaling parents or in this or that denomination that you're going to go wild. There just isn't. At this stage and age in my life, I know firsthand a lot of people that were raised that way that can take it or leave it. I don't think alcohol addiction, I don't think there's a formula or answer that it's necessarily genetic or because we were raised a certain way. I think there's so many things. And that's why I'm very adamant in the book that it's not why you drank. It's why do you not want to drink? And that goes when I'm coaching people with whatever the goal is, whatever we want. Like, what do you want is a very important question in coaching. The subtitles of both my books are, the first one's How to Show Up for the Life You Want. And the second subtitle is How to Show Up for the Sober Life You Want. So always start by asking a client, what do you want? And that's what we're moving toward. And so if somebody wants to be sober from alcohol, if they want to quit a different addiction, if they want to quit perfectionism or controlling thoughts or whatever it is, we're going to really focus on who we want to become, who we are after we've become that person, and not all these things. Not trying to find an answer for why we got to where we're at in the first place. Yes, there's a season and a reason for those things. Knowing why we got to a place we want to move on from is important. It does have some merit. We don't want to stay stuck there, though. We really want to. I work a lot with people on their why for getting where they want to go. Right. So that's my belief about the teetotaling parents thing. I've seen it both ways, so I don't think that can be an answer.
Yeah, I think when we do try to containerize and package, kind of scripted answers to some of these things, there's always an outlier. There's always something that pops up. And I do think, obviously, that when you experience things in the home that have been a real problem and you haven't seen a good model for how to, deal with certain things, sure, that can have an impact as well. However, I've also known people who they didn't grow up in teetotaling homes. They grew up in homes that were like party houses, and they decided to, in their adult years, be teetotalers because of what they saw. So I've seen it kind of all the way around and how those things, express themselves. Now, I do want to ask you, Chris, because I thought this was very interesting. We do have a culture when someone goes through recovery that the goal, oftentimes, depending on the program they've used or the coaching they've received, has been about how many days sober and to do your best to not break that streak. And there being grace if that streak gets broken to start over. I'm back to day one and I'm counting forward. And I know for me, I have some people in my life that count is really important to them. It's a big moment for them to say, this recovery process is working because I'm on day 372, or I'm on day 517, or I'm on day 21. You made a decision that I think is quite fascinating. What is referred to as like a planned relapse. 13 years after you'd had your last drink, you decided to see what you thought. Talk to me about that decision process, how that arrived, all the things. I thought this was really interesting.
I'll start by saying I don't recommend it to other people. The gift that came out of it was this second book. And that's why the book is called Grace Yourself. A lot of things contributed to that. It was 2020. I'd never left California. We moved out of California to a whole new state. It was quarantine 2020, brand new empty nesters, which I, looking back, don't think I processed that new season of life because we just packed up and moved for a new adventure. And my husband and I both were very positive thinking, high growth, adventurous people. It did not feel like I was escaping anything. This is sort of what we do. We were very active. We moved to the next thing. We moved to a new state, and the recovery community, I talk a ton about community in my book. I don't think people who are alcoholic or whatever you want to call it, we talk about what people want to call it in the book too. I do identify as an alcoholic. I'm a person that cannot drink alcohol. And I don't feel like that has a stigma attached to it, but I'm careful that if someone does think that they don't label it that. So I will say, when we moved, I think if you identify as an alcoholic and you're not just being alcohol-free for health reasons, I believe it is imperative to do it in community, to do recovery in community. For me, it can't be done outside of community. So when we moved, I tried to plug into the sober community in my new town, and it just didn't really exist. I didn't find the right sort of group yet. There was one other person there. And I was used to big groups with lots of sobriety where we, like you said, celebrate our day count, celebrate our sobriety. And something in my brain, and our brains are just human. I can't fully explain, this is why we need community to keep us accountable. But something in my brain thought, if God, this is so crazy, if God wanted me to, find a sober community, it would have been easier than this. And so I started that very human, rationalizing, thinking. My husband is a very normal drinker. He can drink half a beer and then leave it on the counter. I've just never been able to do that. He's always been supportive of me being sober, but I don't think that normal drinkers, if you're not alcoholic like me, I just don't think you can fully comprehend what it's like inside the mind of an alcoholic or an addict. So my brain thought, I worked through a lot of stuff. I raised these great kids. I became a coach. I have a lot of willpower and discipline. I'm a high achiever. I think I drank. This is the thinking. I think I drank to numb a lot of things that were going on when I was a young mom. And I don't have those things anymore. I was trying to hold everything together like we do as young moms. And now all those people are launched and life is good. And I am not trying to hold, all those things can hold themselves together without me. And so my brain just made up this story that I don't think I am an alcoholic. I think it's fine if I drink. And I told my husband about this, and he goes, I said, well, you can't have it all though, right? Like, our lives are really great, but we can't have it all. I can't also have an occasional drink. And he said, why? He said, well, why not? And that's kind of our optimistic, positive thinking. Why can't you do what you want? And so as a coach, it was tricky. I still don't really love the word relapse. I think, how could I have relapsed? I have 14 years sobriety. I've worked through all this stuff. I'm at this place in my life that's quite evolved at like self-growth wise. So we can't call that a relapse. And so it was all kinds of sort of battling thoughts in my head. But when my husband said that, and this is the thing about addiction, really, it sits in you no matter how long you have not had a drink or whatever it is you're addicted to. The condition will, I'm not going to call it a disease because I'm not a doctor and I don't know. Some people call it a disease. I just don't, because I don't know enough to call it that. But the condition will progress in you whether you're drinking or not. And it definitely did with age in me. And I think my stubborn brain, a lot of people in recovery are stubborn, and a lot of us are high achievers that are going to try things, keep going and try to make something work. My brain just thought, let's give it a try. Let's really test this theory. And I think on the outside, I maybe pulled it off successfully for a few weeks, not very long, but immediately in my own brain, I knew, shoot, this is not good. Immediately, like first sip, I knew this is not good. It's progressed. What happens, and I explain all of this in the book, but with people like me, again, I'm different than people that are just giving up alcohol as a health reason. Like for people like me, it's already like taken a toll on our brain, right? We've already become pickled. They say in recovery, a saying is, you can't turn a pickle back into a cucumber, right? So we've become pickled and we can't go back to being a cucumber. And I wanted to be a cucumber. And so even though, an addiction is just, it's a liar. I think if you're faith-based and a Christian and believe that Satan is real, like I do, I think, oh man, he'll get his claws in you right away with this type of thing. And so after I broke that streak as a recovering perfectionist who used to have a lot of guilt and shame, the very first thing I started obsessing on was that I broke, like you said, I broke my sober streak. Yeah. I became very competitive. I didn't want to go to a recovery group because I had so much pride. I didn't want to go to the group and say I was on day one. So I do talk about keeping a day counter in the book, and I walk people through, it might work against you if you're so focused on the day counter. Mm-hmm. I like to celebrate sober milestones now that now that I'm back, and I know I'm back and I've got time under me again. But when I was after that first sip and I was trying again to get it back, I needed to set the day counter thing down for a little bit because it was causing too much of that old shame, guilt, and perfectionism to raise its ugly head, and we just can't recover that way. And so I had to swallow my pride. I did find a community group with lots of people. It was at 6:30 in the morning, which I'm like, why do I have to go to the one at 6:30? My kids are out. Yeah. Like, we don't need to do this anymore. The kids are grown. But that's what I do. I still go to that group. And I had to just, and nobody cares. Nobody cares they love you. People in recovery, I have yet to meet someone that's in a successful recovery group that's shame you. They will welcome you with open arms. They will remind you to set your pride down and pick up your humility and just get back to it. And then recovery can begin again. It's not that big of a deal. A saying I like in coaching is, yes, you are special just like everybody else.
Just like everybody else, yeah.
My addiction is not special. I'm not unique. Millions of people get addicted to things. Recovery, there's nothing shameful or stigmatic about it. And, I think recovery is a win in itself. I don't appreciate people being anti-AA or anti a different group. I think there's lots of groups that exist because a lot of personalities exist. We have different denominations and churches and therapists and coaches, and there's not a one-stop shop for everybody. And so there is some new quit literature that does bash certain recovery groups. And I'm not a fan of that. I just think we all, and I explain all of that in the book, it's like as a coach, we have to look at the individual where they're at and meet them there. And there are nowadays, thank you, Jesus, there's groups for everybody. Like if somebody says to me, oh, I just couldn't find my group, I'm gonna call BS, and I will take your hand and help you find a group.
We're gonna find you a group.
Yeah.
I'm encouraged that what I'm seeing today is a lot of conversation about a sober lifestyle, and it's being pulled out of what I think in some ways might have been an impediment, Chris, for a while, a moralistic understanding of this, and taking it more into a place of saying, look, even for really solid health reasons. We now know that alcohol is a class 1 carcinogen. We now know it's implicated in a lot of breast cancer type diagnoses and all kinds of stuff. And so my hope is that because we're actually now doing a better job, I think, as a culture, taking a look at how is this enhancing our lives or not? What are some of the things surrounding it? My hope is that it will remove some of the stigma even more and help people get to the help that they need. As I shared with you before we started the podcast recording, I've said this before, my audience is going to be familiar with this if they've heard me talk about it. One of the things I started to get really concerned about in my tenure in vocational ministry was what I was seeing as a really normalizing a mom drinking culture, a mom wine culture. And on the one hand, again, coming from a teetotaling background, I thought there could potentially be some dangers with taking that approach. But I also saw people who were very much at risk, and they were in some ways, even though no one was pressuring them, but there was still that, as it was becoming part of a normal expression within certain faith communities, the danger to some of those whose biology might match closer to yours, Chris, where it was, there are people who do not need to mess with this at all. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on how, because you said you're in a marriage where your husband has continued to occasionally have a beer, not a problem. I know other people in relationships and families who've made the decision, we're not going to have it around at all in support of a family member or loved one who's struggling. I think that faith communities and book clubs and all kinds of women's gatherings are struggling with some of the same sorts of questions. How do we support those for whom this is a real issue while also not becoming legalistic about it for people who, as you say, can take it or leave it? So where have you landed on that in terms of how communities respond to those who really have no business messing with it and are trying to do their best to live life sober for the life that they want?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And I've seen a lot of progress in this area in the last few years. I do think, and I should say too, the more we know as humans, the more we know about something, we evolve. Now, yes, there's a lot of information and podcasts that alcohol, while maybe I wasn't anti-alcohol for other people before, now I am seeing, one of my kids' too don't drink at all. Teetotalers and we never preached that they needed to be that way. It's just they're young and healthy and smart and have heard the evidence of how this is a ethanol. It's a toxic poison. So they're kind of just didn't see the point, right? So as we evolve and have more information, I'll say, like, my husband now, and I think with age, it's like sugar or anything. We just can't have the things we used to. But he does now. I should clarify. He does, like, if he wants a beer, he'll have a non-alcoholic beer. Like, what? There's so many nice products on the market now. But on occasion, he will still have a drink. He probably, I don't even pay attention anymore. I mean, maybe he'll have one drink a week nowadays. When we were younger, it was so different. It was like in the mom group, like you said, that is the pattern. That's the social pattern. And you have a glass of wine or whatever it is at 5:00. And I think because it was so accepted that people don't realize that their bodies and brains have become addicted to that pattern. So I'm still not anti-alcohol because I don't want people to stumble in that belief in as much as I don't want them to stumble by having it. So I think knowing your audience is great. If somebody's still, I'm quick to tell people, look, it doesn't bother me. I'm good. I'm in a recovery group. I'm solid. It doesn't bother me when people around me drink. I let people know that because people are considerate and they want to know. If I feel like somebody is still struggling or maybe they're early in recovery, I think it is a good idea not to have alcohol around. So it's like the recovery group thing. It's going to be different for everybody. The wonderful thing is, though, it is changing, like you said, to where it doesn't need to be, oh, so-and-so doesn't drink. And then we have this big, stigma that marks them as this weak, undisciplined person. Everybody knows, unless we've been living under a rock lately, that that's just not true. It's not a moral problem. Some of us got far into the addiction before we realized that, and now we're pickled. And so we have to have support groups and take extra measures.
A lot of wisdom there. And I think I have to say too, I think if someone realizes that someone is going to be part of the community, they have an issue with drinking. And I got to just say, I feel like somebody might be listening out there. Listen, if you feel kind of resentful if there are people where you're like, oh, she won't even have a glass of wine. Can I lovingly encourage you to take a look at your own relationship with alcohol? Because if you feel like everybody's got to be doing it for you to feel okay, something might be up in your heart. And I want to say that with a lot of love and a lot of grace. But I do think it's important to ask yourself the question. Chris, I'm so excited for you with this new book, Grace Yourself, How to Show Up for the Sober Life You Want. Let the listener know where they can go to find the book, find out more about you, look at your coaching, all that stuff.
Love it. ChrisJanssenCoaching.com. I'm keeping that updated. That's where you can read about my services, the book, my first book, Living All In. And then from now till launch day, I'm offering bonuses for people who want to buy the book in bulk. Maybe they want me to facilitate a virtual book club, all kinds of fun bonuses at graceyourselfbook.com.
Awesome. Okay, We'll get that into the show notes. Rebecca does that for us. And that is, listener, where you can go to check out more about Chris and all the great stuff she's offering. Chris, thank you so much for being vulnerable about your own journey, for adding tools and approaches and ways of looking at that through the coaching education you've done. Really appreciate you being with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julie.
All right, listener, you know what to do. Go to the show notes like we talked about. Also, we would love it. It is the greatest gift when you grab the link from an episode like this and you send it to someone you love who you think could benefit from hearing the information. So if you would do that for us, that just makes all the difference in the world. And it really is so appreciated by myself and by the team. Be sure to check out AllMomDoes.com and AllMomDoes on the socials. Great community for you. Lots of support for the season you're in as a woman, as a mom, as a wife, all the things. And I love it too when you come see me over at Julie Lyles Lyles Carr, usually on Instagram. That's where I hang out the most. So come see me over there. As always, I want to hear the topics you're interested in, the questions you have, guest suggestions, anything like that. We want to know. And I would love to hear from you. And I will see you next time on the AllMomDoes podcast.